December 23, 1972, Three Rivers Stadium. The Pittsburgh Steelers host the Oakland Raiders in the AFC Divisional Playoff. With 22 seconds left, down 7-6, things look dim for the home team.
Touchdown, Stabler!
Facing 4th and 10 from their own 40-yard line, Terry Bradshaw drops back, fires downfield, and then the unexpected.
It's caught out of the air. The ball is pulled in by Franco Harris.
Running back Franco Harris plucks the ball out of thin air, races to the end zone, and secures the most controversial win in NFL history. But what if?
All right, here we go, guys. Whoa! Today's case, 100-2, the most famous play in pro football history, the Immaculate Reception 1972 divisional round, the Raiders at the Pittsburgh Steelers. The survivor of this one gets the undefeated Miami Dolphins. What happens if the Immaculate Reception falls to the ground? What becomes of the Miami Dolphins? What becomes of Al Davis if his Raiders win that game in Three Rivers Stadium, and his quarterback, the Snake? Always loved the Snake.
Didn't start that game.
How about
He did
that?
not. Daryl LaMonica.
That's just amazing.
Yeah.
Think about it.
What happens to the team that won that game and went on to be the dynasty of the 70s Steelers?
The Pittsburgh Steelers are the champions of the National Football League for the 4th time.
And the would-be dynasty of the 70s, the Dallas Cowboys. All right, let's get into it here. If the pass is incomplete, the Raiders win that game. They go on to Miami to play, like I say, the undefeated Miami Dolphins.
Well, that's the key. The key is this isn't the AFC Championship game. This is simply, the game to get to Miami and to play that game. And so I think that's where it's got to start right there is the winner of this game still has to get through the Dolphins, who are undefeated on their path to a perfect record, 17-0 and all that kind of stuff. Can the winner of this game, whether it is the Raiders or the Steelers, beat the Miami Dolphins the following week? So the Steelers winning, they weren't able to get that done.
So let's go to the situation where if he doesn't catch it, okay? Guess who had, to this point, owned the Miami Dolphins in previous years?
All right, wait a minute. You need to set up the situation before you go on to the Miami Dolphins. Let's see how improbable this was. 22 seconds left. Like, this actually matters. Before you even get to Miami, you gotta get to this situation first. Do you know what the probability that the Steelers win the game?
This
you
much?
map it to
Below 1%.
It's actually not below 1%. It's around 9.3%. That doesn't factor in any other conditions other than just the exact down, the exact moment, 22 seconds left.
Well, if you want to go probability here, Cynthia, you know the probability that in any of our lifetimes we see a play as weird as this one? It's this. This is my probability.
A donut?
0. It's the
Is
weirdest.
that just a prop or are you going to eat that?
It is 4th down, still 10 to go. Pittsburgh's ball at their own 40-yard line.
Watching it on a 19-inch black and white TV with my dad from Pittsburgh in the basement. And, when you think about it, the guy that threw that ball on that play right there, Terry Bradshaw, winner of 4 Super Bowls, first ballot Hall of Famer right there. I mean, does his career change?
His career now changes. He's not in movies. He's not on TV. He's not whatever. He.
That could have
his
cost
career
us
now.
Smokey and the Bandit.
Yeah, well,
Or at least Cannonball Run.
maybe that doesn't happen if you don't have that immaculate reception right
All
there.
right, let me point out a couple of things. To the point that the Raiders had the Dolphins number, they did in that short-term window, did tend to take care of business. Weird note, the title game the following week was again played in Three Rivers Stadium, even though the Dolphins were undefeated. They used to rotate it among the divisions back then. In this case, if the Raiders win it, do we know where that game would have been? Would it have been in Miami? It would have gone to Miami.
It would have been in Miami.
I think that impacts what would the weather forecast have been?
100%. So it was the high of 74, no rain, winds 10 to 15 miles an hour.
Doesn't that ultimately favor the Raiders then, who
puts
would
it-
want to sling it around a
Puts
little
it in
bit?
Perfect conditions for the Snake to come in here and do his thing.
Well, the fact of the matter is, in this era, the Raiders had kind of taken on the stink of a team that was consistently relevant but didn't get over the hump. and that was the case with John Madden and what was going on with the Raiders. Also, though, and even more prominently, for Don Shula. Remember, he loses the biggest Super Bowl of all time, Super Bowl III, as a heavy favorite with the mighty Baltimore Colts.
The New York Jets are the world champions in a stunning upset.
He gets whipped by the Cowboys in Super Bowl VI. If he loses this game as an undefeated guy, if the Raiders take him down, he's the guy who's always good but can't win the big one. Even if he does win Super Bowl VIII, Don Shula is not the story head coach that he is at this point. And the Raiders likely do emerge, and Ken Stabler, with another Super Bowl, goes into the Hall of Fame much more quickly. But I think that the team, obviously, that not just, it transcends just the 1972 season. The Dolphins are a footnote in history.
Right, because they've been riding that whole undefeated trend.
When you think about what could have happened, John Madden and Al Davis, they start the dynasty right there in 72. They go to Miami and take care of the Dolphins. You know, and then they go
Wait, why are you saying they just automatically beat the Dolphins? You think the Dolphins are just going to roll over for that?
With that offense, that Miami Dolphin offense, like, you don't think that John Madden right here has got a defense right there to stop that running game? That's all you got to stop. There's no quarterback play. Like, I think they could go down there. If it's an incomplete pass right there and the Raiders win that game 7-6, I think maybe the dynasty is the Raiders in the 70s.
Well, first of all, I think it's revisionist history because I think that 72 team still wins. I'm not making the argument that they're the best team of all time. I'm making the argument that in this situation that they were in, and narrow wins still count as wins. Yeah. It's not like you win by 1 point, you win by 15 points, it's still one win, right? Look at that. If you go back in time to the Miami defense, they allowed 12.2 points per game. And part of the reason they were doing that is because their takeaways and turnovers, so their turnover differential, plus 18, was monstrous. They were getting extra possessions for their offense. So their defense was causing their offense to win. So that was a huge deal, especially considered when you look at kind of the same fundamentals for the Raiders, who they would have matched up.
Look, Baldy, I'm not old enough to have been around during this era. But when I talk to a lot of older scouts, older personnel guys, they talk about that undefeated Miami Dolphins team as a really, really good team. They do not crown them as the best team of all time, that they get labeled as an undefeated team. So I'm kind of relying on their opinion on this one. I want to know, look, you said hero a minute ago, Dave. You've got Captain America up there. Are we going to explain how Roger Staubach gets into this whole thing?
Yes, let's do that. The Raiders and Cowboys, as high-end as they both were through that entire decade, never played a Super Bowl against each other. I suppose buying into your argument, Baldy, because I'm a generous soul. It gives me no pleasure to take away a Lombardi from the Pittsburgh Steelers. But let's say that the Cowboys certainly are the team of the decade if they beat Pittsburgh in either of the two Super Bowls that those two played, 10 and 13. So, can you make a case then that Roger Staubach is, by the time Dan Marino and John Elway arrived, the greatest quarterback ever?
Had a lot of heartache leading up to that first Super Bowl win. I mean, you talk about the Ice Bowl game. There was some there was the type of defeats that we see from the Saints in the playoffs in recent years right here. That was the Cowboys team. Landry talked about it all the time, about just how the pain just sort of, it just percolated, and it just kind of led into the next season before they finally broke through. Remember, they're an expansion team, don't win a game in 1960. Like, it was a slow build, and then there was just these heartache of losses up there in Green Bay and those type of things before they were able to break through. And that kind of built the franchise for the 70s. And maybe they are the team that we're talking about instead of the Steelers.
Well, here's a question. So how does history look back, and why should be good on this one? You look back, I think if you're going to go kind of ranking coaches and where they're viewed in history, you have Shula here, right? Tom Landry, as great as he was, longevity is a big part of that, but just not getting enough of the Super Bowl wins.
But to talk about Tom Landry, let's say he gets another championship right here, right? So he's got these championships.
Is that Mount Rushmore for him? That's what I'm asking. Does that put him up there on Mount Rushmore?
It puts him up there. And then also, how much more tough of a decision is it when Jerry Jones buys this team to say, hey, I'm moving on and bringing in this hot guy, Jimmy Johnson. But, you think about those Cowboys teams, and if they're playing the Raiders instead, that's the swing. Pittsburgh was a team that kind of spoiled it for two clubs. They were the Chicago Bulls, who ruined it for whoever they played. They played in the Eastern Conference, and whoever they played in the Western Conference. That's what the Steelers did to these two clubs.
Well, I'll do you one better there, Wyche, to add to your point here, and kind of what Baldy's getting at there. Yeah, Tom Landry, the legend, the hat, and everything else couldn't win the big game. He kept coming up short to the Packers, or did so 2 years in a row back in the NFC. In fact, if Landry's Cowboys beat the Packers in '66 and then win again in '67, it's not the Lombardi Trophy. Here's my crude drawing of it.
A tie?
This is the Landry. No, that looks like a tie. That's the trophy. That's the Landry Trophy now. How would that impact the Steelers dynasty?
Also,
it doesn't impact the Steelers dynasty. When you have that many Hall of Fame players, there's so much talent on that team.
74 is the big draft. Yes, they get Bradshaw in 70, Franco in 72, Mean Joe in 69, but 74
Here they come.
is Swan, Stallworth, Webster, Lambert. That's when they really load up into their
Hall of
Super Bowl
Famers.
run. Look up at this board. With all due respect to the San Francisco 49ers of the 80s, the Cowboys of the early 90s, the Packers of the 60s, and otherwise, the all-time collection of juggernauts existed in the 70s. The Dolphins, the mighty Raiders, the great Dallas Cowboys teams, and who still took 4 out of 6 during that window?
Amazing
it was
run.
the Pittsburgh Steelers, the greatest team of the 20th century, remains.
You know,
I mean, I'll just say
I'm
this.
glad you could get that out.
All right, just go get a deep breath.
So, if the Immaculate Reception doesn't happen, Pittsburgh still reels off a few titles with too much talent not to win big, but their dominance dims, allowing the Dallas Cowboys or Raiders a shot as the team of the 70s. The loser in all of this, Miami. The Dolphins lose to the Raiders the following week, erasing an undefeated season and the legacy of Don Shula, not quite as perfect. Champagne bottles in Miami remain unpopped.
Let's tie it up right here. We'll put that there. That's a wrap on the Immaculate Reception. And I think we can all agree it's a good thing for pro football that it happened.